Gender equality is one of, if not the most important goals the UN has set for 2030, but the global pandemic has dealt a serious blow to progress in this area. Between 2019 and 2020, some women, to the total of 54 million, lost their jobs. This is closely tied to a caregiving crisis, yet as countries boosted social protection, only 11% of policies globally have addressed women's unpaid care work. COVID-19 has also sparked a shadow pandemic of violence against women worldwide, both online and offline. It is clear that without real progress on issues around gender equality, a meaningful, holistic recovery is not possible. As countries move gradually from response to recovery, they have a unique opportunity to unlock the kind of transformative change that will maximize SDG progress between now and 2030. Both of our speakers are leaders in championing gender equality and brings actionable solutions to the table. Ms. Melinda Gates is the co-chair of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. She is a long-time advocate for women's equality with a special focus on the care economy. And Ms. Sima Sami Bahous is the newly announced Executive Director of UN Women, who will shortly be taking up her office. She's a champion for women and girls who brings vast development experience to this new leadership role. Ms. Bahous, congratulations on your recently announced appointment as Executive Director of UN Women. In these complex times for the world with so many competing priorities, why is it that societies must spare no effort in ensuring gender equality? Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your congratulations. I'm deeply honored to be announced and to be appointed as the Executive Director of UN Women. I must say that gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls is integral to all priorities. It is, in fact, the key priority in all our development efforts. To recover from COVID-19, or to accelerate and achieve the SDGs, or to ensure peaceful, prosperous societies, gender equality is inextricably bound up in all aspects of sustainable development. Actually, it is inextricably bound in all the competing priorities which you mentioned earlier, from health, from education, climate justice, peace and security. Everywhere, everything and everywhere has the key priority is today gender equality, and we cannot separate it from other challenges that the world faces today. The UN Secretary General, as you know, has called gender equality the world's greatest human rights challenge and a prerequisite for a better world. The prioritization of gender equality was also clearly expressed in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which of course, as you all know, includes a dedicated goal number 5 on gender equality and related targets across the agenda. Gender equality is not only about women and girls, it is also about boys and men. We have seen, as you have mentioned also earlier, over the past 18 months, how women and girls were disproportionately affected by the socioeconomic fallout of the pandemic, and how COVID-19 has exacerbated gender inequality, pushing more women into poverty, pushing them out of jobs and away from access to educational and health services, including for sexual and reproductive health services and also for social protection. At the same time, the crisis has revealed and worsened the underlying inequalities that continue to shape women's and girls' lives today. Women have lost their jobs at a faster rate than men and have taken on more unpaid care work than ever before and have experienced greater gender-based violence in a shadow pandemic that spans the world today. At the same time, women have been at the forefront of the world's battle against COVID-19. As healthcare workers, risking their lives, record speed, as carers in families and communities, and also as leaders and public health leaders steering us through the very worst of times. Despite all that, and despite also the women being over 70% of frontline health and care workers, only 24% of the world's health ministers are women. Women hold just 25% of senior roles in health. Too often, services are delivered by women, but decisions are made by men, and we need to change that. We need to make sure that women participate in decision-making meaningfully and actively. Generally, the lack of women's representation at leadership level also is lacking. Only 22 countries around the world have a woman as a head of state or government, and just 21% of ministers are women today. Representation is critical for women's needs to be included in governmental decision making, in policies, and also in planning. Also, I want to highlight the important situation that we are facing today for women and girls, the situation in Afghanistan. It shows us that we must continue to prioritize women's and girls' rights, their rights to education, to work, to health and social services, including protection services. We know today that many Afghan women and girls fear a return to a dark past and a generation of girls out of school. However, we also know that they fear losing access to basic health, education, and protection services. We all need to stand and work together to prevent reversal of the hard-won rights of Afghan women and girls and all women and girls around the world as a result of COVID. Finally, I would say that respect for human rights is a litmus test against which any authority must be judged, and respect for women's human rights is also a litmus test against which any authority must be judged. We believe that women's rights are human rights, and upholding them is paramount for societies and humanity to progress and prosper. UN Women will continue to engage and will stay and deliver everywhere where women and girls need help and support. On the economic front, we know that economies flourish when women are engaged. What is good for gender equality is good for the economy and society. We know that gender equality is possible. We must keep hope. We must have hope as the world learns to live with COVID-19 and starts to emerge from the crisis. There is a generational opportunity to use the recovery from this crisis to shape a better, greener, more gender equal and sustainable world with women and girls at the center and with the Sustainable Development Goals and the Agenda 2030 as our target. Thank you.
Well, Ms. Bahous, don't go anywhere. We'll come back to you in a second, but I thank you for creating really a runway for this conversation. I will also point out, you mentioned, women in leadership. I will point out that Norway is losing a leader. Germany will soon be losing a female leader. We've seen that the president of Estonia recently stepped down, so I think those numbers might need to be amended. Ms. French-Gates, let's bring you in here. You've been waiting patiently. What do you see as the greatest barriers to advancing gender equality during the recovery and beyond? How do we overcome that? And I think speak broadly to the nature of Goal 5, right? The cross-cutting nature of Goal 5 and how that informs our success on all the 17 goals as it relates to the 2030 agenda. Over to you.
Sure. Well, and it's great to see Sima in this role in UN Women, and I think she's been very articulate about the issues. We saw what COVID-19 did was it laid bare the structural inequities that already existed in society. Women have been marginalized in their homes, their communities, the workforce for a very long time. And so when you look at what's been going on in our economies, you're seeing the International Labor Organization, for instance, is saying women are still going to lose 2 million jobs this year on top of the 13 million women that are out of work. And why is that? At the same time, men are going back to their jobs at a very swift rate. They're regaining their jobs. Well, the reason is that women's unpaid work and unpaid caregiving burdens have gone up while their job opportunities have gone down. And so we need to look at this barrier and figure out what is good policy that can help women with that unpaid care so that they can do what they want and return to their jobs. As a foundation, we really look at 3 key areas. We call them cash, care, and data. If you look at the economic recoveries going on around the world, cash means good social protection programs for women, putting money in women's hands. Caregiving means having good policies, so you subsidize childcare or you put policies in place like paid family medical leave. And by data, we mean collecting the data so that we can know exactly where to pinpoint programming as governments, as the private sector, as foundations, so that we can have a full and robust return of our economies. If we invest in social protection, We can lift 100 million women out of poverty. If we invest in the right way in caregiving, we can actually add 3 trillion of GDP across the world. So these are programs that countries should look at in policies, whether you're low, middle, or high income, so that you can get a full and just economic return. We've got to put women at the center, and we will get return to our economies that we want globally.
Let me stay with you, Ms. French Gates. In numerous conversations I would have with Ms. Bahous' predecessor, Dr. Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, we talked about how good policy was important, but good implementation of policy was also very important, and that is always lacking in terms of the implementation of the targets we are seeking to achieve in Goal 5. That's an important peg, right? Good policy, but also the implementation. What do you make of that connection?
Well, I think you're exactly right. And so what we're seeing in country after country, we're seeing governments make investments. Let me give you a couple examples. For instance, in Kenya, they've made sure that there's more opportunities for caregiving. So there's a great micro business called Kidogo. It exists so that women can set up these businesses, but then 12,000 women have used this childcare during the crisis, put their children in childcare. And what we're seeing of the families and women who use that childcare service, they're actually getting a 24% return in their own income. We're seeing South Africa put in great social protection payments for families, and some specifically around childcare, because they know women can't go back to work if they have to care for their children at home. And lastly, Pakistan, at an enormous scale, has looked at digital finance, and they are making sure that women not only have mobile phones, but they know how to use them. They know how to use a digital financial account on their phone, and they put social protection payments through those digital accounts. And what we know from other countries around the world is you put those digital payments in the hands of women, right, they spend it on their family. And that's why governments want to get it directly in the hands of women. So Pakistan is building not just for now, they've got 16.9 million new families using digital money. They're putting in place now during COVID-19 something that will sustain them over the long term. That's good programming and good policy around the globe.
Ms. Bahous, let's just take the issue of childcare, right? This is not just a developing nation conversation. If you look at a country like the United States, you see this battle in the United States Congress just in terms of seeking to address paid childcare, given the inequities that were really highlighted in this pandemic. This is a global conversation, and it affects both the rich and the poor, not so?
Yes, of course. I mean, we need to really to look at the impacts of COVID-19 on children, also on women and on their households, and to make sure to understand fully that the impacts of crisis are never gender neutral, and they are always, whether they were in the humanitarian side or the climate or conflict related or COVID-19 related, it is no different. I think we should look at a fresh course where gender equality, environmental sustainability, and social justice, which is very important, is put at the center of economic recovery and transformation, and looking at families and looking at equal pay and looking at how women should be getting equal pay, not only in the US or everywhere in the world. And this would be our major goal and our major target, to make sure that social protection policies, as well as employment and fiscal policies, that they would be there to ensure protection for women and children and girls in particular in the face of shocks, in the faces of any pandemic or any humanitarian crisis or any conflict, and also across the life course. So basically what we are looking at and what we should be looking at is universal gender responsive social protection systems that must be strengthened, and that must be specifically looking at risks and challenges challenges faced by women and by girls, and to see how best we can target them and how best we can look at them. One other solution is to make public investments in the care economy a key pillar of economic recovery, and this is extremely also important, where affordable quality care services are critical to support women and their children to re-enter into the labor force, of course, and the well-being of their children, and also of older persons, where women are also taking care of their older persons as well. And they then women can drive a job-rich recovery, hopefully. So we are looking at all this, and we hope that recovery will be soon. And as I mentioned, we keep hope going, but we also keep working. And we also keep calling for action, and we also keep trying to raise as much awareness as possible towards the issues. But as I always say, awareness is not an objective. Awareness is an objective only when it becomes an action.
And I think if the UN's development agenda has taught us anything, is that progress and recovery is not exactly a straight line, because as you're recovering, new problems emerge. Let me stay with you, Ms. Bahous. I want to talk a little bit about what happened in Paris earlier this year, the Generation Equality Forum. What did that show us about global momentum towards gender equality, particularly when working across sectors and generations? I know they talked about this nuanced, different version of what multilateralism has come to represent, the different stakeholders. This was not just a government-driven process. It really was a bottom-up process. Just speak to what that taught us and where we go from here.
Absolutely. But let me first start by saying that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation have played a unique role for the Generation Equality Forum as creative and robust thought partners, and also as well as practical and generous financial supporters. So thank you very much, Melinda. I also know that the team at UN Women has deeply appreciated Melinda's personal engagement and commitment vision throughout. As you all know, the Generation Equality is a multi-stakeholder initiative that brings together representatives across generations, which is important, from governments, from civil society, from youth organizations, including females, the UN system, private sector, philanthropies, to accelerate progress for gender equality and women's rights, and support the accelerated full implementation of the Beijing Declaration, the Platform of Action of CEDAW, and also of the Decade for Action of the Sustainable Development Goals. And this is a tremendous opportunity for the whole world to help women rise, and to rise with women and girls as well. It is also, this initiative is also strongly anchored in the Decade of Action for the SDGs, and fully aligned with the Secretary General's recently launched common agenda as an agenda of action designed to strengthen and accelerate multilateral cooperation, ensuring that the entire 2030 agenda delivers for women and girls. And it is important to see it today, more than ever, because of the issues of multilateralism and a lot of question marks about multilateralism, how effective it is, and how good it has been, and how we can make it better. It is important to see that Generation Equality has succeeded in raising commitments, thousands of commitments to transformative action. And they have also been able, this initiative, to raise the largest financial investment to advance gender equality and women's rights ever in history. So this is important to say, that when you centralize the voices of a variety of actors, including civil society, including youth, including women, including girls, it brings success, and it also makes sure that everyone understands that gender equality is across sectors, and it can be done, it can be achieved, and the outcomes are important for us and will be important. Now, how to do it and to accelerate it and to make it maybe become more successful is to build concrete mechanisms and diverse partnerships, and to continue to maintain this building and this building of partnerships and diversity as well, so that we can sustain such initiatives throughout the coming years. And it is also important to realize that inspiration for the future is very important. And when you bring all these sectors and all these member states and all these actors together, and you leverage all the tools and all the digital platforms that are the major achievements of today, you see how much you can really do for women and for girls and for gender equality, and also for the SDGs and for realizing them. So meaningful engagement of young people, of young women, of all sectors, as I mentioned, of all women in all their diversity, of all young people in their diversity, being inclusive and making sure that UN, member states, civil society, and inclusively of all other actors are working together to make sure that this process becomes a process that is sustained and that brings gender equality and the achievement of SDG 5 to hopefully to the table by 2030, hopefully even earlier if we can do that.
I will say, Ms. Bahous, a lot of people are getting their first introduction to how you will approach your new role as Executive Director. And what we can see from your conversation is a lot of granular detail. It's data-driven, and I think that's very important to achieving Goal 5. Let me bring you back in high praise there, Ms. French-Gates, from the future Executive Director of UN Women for your role in terms of capacitating the Generation Equality Forum. Speak to the cross-cutting nature of what was done there and how that can inform how we approach the other goals.
Yes, I think one of the fantastic things that happened about the Generation Equality Forum was there were, as Sima said, these 6 action coalitions. And what they did work well over 18 months to work together to bring private business, to bring government, civil society, advocates together at one Zoom table. It all had to be done online because of COVID, but to really discuss what does good policy look like? What are good implementation programs? Where do we need more data? Just to give one example, coming out of the Economic Justice and Action Coalition, that group decided they wanted to carry on their work after the Generation Equality Forum, specifically around caregiving, because they know this is such a crisis for women, the caregiving piece, the unpaid labor that women do. And they're seeing good policy and programmings going in some countries. They want to make sure that gets shared across countries and that good implementation happens. So I was really encouraged to see that all this lead up and work that happened before the Generation Equality Forum will carry on. It's the only way we're going to ever get to some of those 2030 goals on gender equality. And so it was great to see those partners so enthused about their work that they're forming even these smaller task groups to keep pieces of it going.
Yeah, and as we look at this sort of from a macro level, it is about those smaller task forces. It is about localizing how you approach the various 17 goals. Localization, Ms. Bahous, is very, very important when it comes to gender equality, because it's gender-based violence, for example, is happening within the household, within communities, and it's for those communities to resolve, as opposed to perhaps having good policy from a national government, but they can't necessarily go into everyone's home where a woman is facing the fists of a man. Speak to that, the importance of localization.
I will tell you one thing. Nothing on the SDGs would happen, and no achievement will be done, no significant achievement will be done unless we localize the SDGs, and unless also people at the local level, at the grassroots level, understand the SDGs, understand how important the SDGs are for their lives, and can really be active participants and meaningful participants in the implementation of these SDGs. Nationalizing also the SDGs is also important, so that national policies and national programs and national initiatives will trickle down to the grassroots and to local communities, so that they benefit from the SDGs and the process towards achieving the 2030 agenda. And gender equality is, as we have always said, it is the one that is interrelated with every single SDG goal that there is, and we need to make sure that it continues to be this cross-cutting goal throughout all the goals. This is extremely important. Involving women at the grassroots level, at the local level, and having them understand how they can be actively engaged in the SDGs and in their implementations in their homes, in their schools, in their in their farms, in their yards, everywhere. It is also very important for us to be able to do that. And of course, we will not say that member states need to continue to work on policies, need to continue to work on plans, and also multilateral cooperation needs to continue to help countries who are in need, to help countries who are less fortunate, and to help the people of those countries who are less fortunate to continue to accelerate and to implement the SDGs. As we said earlier in this conversation, this is an all of society approach.
Right.
It is essential for all of us really to work on the SDGs and to achieve, so that we can achieve the ambitions of the 2030 agenda and to effectively build back better from COVID-19. This is extremely important for the United Nations, for member states, for civil society, for private sector, for everyone involved in wanting to see improving the lots of people everywhere and prosperity and peace in the world. Don't forget the issue of the SDGs as well, and the issue of 2030 is also very much interrelated and interlinked with building peace and security around the world, something that we all need and something that the United Nations and member states and everyone else involved wants to see happen. So, and as the Secretary General said in his latest report, our common agenda, it is a new whole of society, multi-stakeholder approach. It is the only way to overcome the challenges of our present time and to accelerate the implementation of the SDGs and realize the 2030 agenda, not least at the local level.
So as much as we talk about an all-of-society approach and about building back better, you have this momentum, right, from the Generation Equality Forum, but you still have the crosswinds from the current COVID-19 pandemic, and it really has set back the agenda. And remember, the pandemic has not gone away, and no one really knows exactly when that happens. There's a great deal of misinformation out there. There are these national fights that are happening in countries like the United States, but in countries around the world, my country, South Africa as well. What do you make of the scenario, Ms. French-Gates, where you have this momentum, you understand what needs to be done, there is good policy, but you have these crosswinds that are coming through factors that perhaps we cannot control?
Well, I think that's why this is exactly the right time to look at those crosswinds and see how we take them down. They have existed for a long time, but they're actually right here in our face right now because of COVID. We're seeing lots of kids out of school. So we're seeing more women home pushed out of their jobs. We're seeing an increase, as you said, in domestic violence. We know it from good data around the world. So this is why we have to put women at the center, the very center of every type of economic recovery. And for instance, in the United States right now, there's a piece of legislation that is moving through Congress to finally put paid family medical leave in the United States. It's been 30 years. The United States is the only industrialized country that doesn't have it. And guess what? It's extraordinarily popular with men and women. 70% say we need it in our country. So that is a huge crosswind, women out of their jobs, kids at home from school. But the government is saying, finally, we're going to take down this barrier. We're going to take down the barrier of caregiving from women so we can get a full economic recovery. That's good policy. And that's how we can stop these crosswinds and go back to work while we care for one another during an ongoing pandemic.
Ms. Bahous, you're nodding. The pandemic of misinformation, right? On top of the pain and suffering that the other pandemic has wrought. Speak to that and what the UN and UN Women can do in that regard.
Well, yes, the pandemic of misinformation has been, another pandemic, another shadow pandemic.
Because it exacerbates the struggles we're already facing, right? If you do not deal with misinformation, you're not going to deal with the root issues that you're trying to address.
Absolutely. And it does not help because it doesn't show the right thing. It does not show the root causes. And it also makes people not understand the issues at all. So our partnership, for example, with the Gates Foundation, with Melinda in particular, on getting the right data is extremely important. UN Women has always been looking at the best data. We need to look at the data, more data for women, more data for girls. I know from my past experience that data on girls is largely non-existent in so many areas and in so many sectors. So we need to look at that and separate the data, disaggregate the data also to understand where the issues are. There are inequalities in data. There are also inequalities in even analyzing the data and finding out where we need to work on that, and how we can also strengthen the programs from coming from different data and different places. I think building forward better with data is important. I think also the UN has had a number of campaigns that were fighting misinformation, that were fighting sharing information that you are not sure of, and these are also important for the public to know and to understand better what is the pandemic and how to deal with it. So building forward better will require first of all good information, good data, collaboration with all the stakeholders, placing women, as Melinda said, women and girls at the center of all aspects of the response and the recovery, including through gender responsive laws, policies, and budgeting. And that is extremely important.
Did you want to jump in, Ms. French-Gates? Did I see a hand?
Yes, I wanted to give one specific example of how to combat misinformation. One of the things that when there was the horrible outbreak of COVID-19 that we all saw in India, that the Indian government did is they knew they had these women's collectives, that is groups of about 12 to 20 women that exist all over the country. And those women's collectives have long given health information and vital information to their communities. So they armed hundreds of millions of women with the right information about wearing masks and how to protect your family. And those women went out in their own communities and spread real information. That is a way that you put women at the very center. They know what's right for their families. If you give them the right information, as women have told me all over the world, even in Niger, they said, women talk. When we have the right information, we talk. We talk at the well, we talk at the births of the children, we talk when we're grinding millet. I know I talk to my women friends in the US. What are you doing with your family? How are you protecting your kids? Women talk and spread information, and women at the heart of this economic recovery can absolutely change society.
Sounds like localization works, Ms.
Absolutely.
French-Gates. I think that's a perfect example of that as well. Ms. Bahous, let me ask you this. We know, these conversations are also about best practice, so countries can learn from what has worked and what hasn't worked. We know from past crises and the successful experiences of some countries in poverty reduction, for example, and fostering balanced, inclusive growth that can help really set them on a fresh course. Are there some countries that you point to, in terms of this broader discussion and say, hey, look at what's happening here, look at the success there, and maybe transpose that and implement it where you are?
Well, I think one of the important issues that we were talking about today is social protection, and I think countries like Brazil, like Chile, like South Africa, like Togo have made efforts to close the gaping holes in social protection systems by experimenting with cash transfers for informal workers, which include, of course, many women, and strengthening access to unemployment insurance for domestic workers. This is an important and a very successful way of handling social protection systems. Also, Kenya and Senegal spearheaded public procurement programs that connect women, small-scale producers, to a predictable source of income and offer support to their livelihoods in times of crisis, as well as ensuring fresh and nutritious food for schools and hospitals. In other countries also, we see that women are given mobile phones, they are given access to credit, they are given access to more information, and and this also helps them to move forward with their families. And as we all know, when women are given cash or credit or any support, immediately they spend it on their families, on their kids, on their education, and on their health. So this also helps improve societies. Also, from our experience, we know that countries that had broad-based social protection systems in place were able to rapidly use and adapt existing schemes to extend coverage and increase levels of protection in the face of crisis. For example, in Europe, wage subsidies made up for over half of the earnings lost by the reduction in working hours, thereby mitigating increases in inequality. Some of the larger cash transfers in Latin America, for example, helped also to prevent women among recipients. So, I mean, many examples that we can bring from the world that are successful, and that we really also need to help integrate them into national care systems and national social protection systems that will help women and girls stay at the center of every development effort and every effort to recover and to rebuild.
I will just say, Ms. Bahous, your picture is getting a bit darker and darker. I'm not sure if there's a light that you can turn on for us, but let me bring Ms. French Gates back in here. You've also traveled a fair amount around the world. Where have you seen best practice in terms of the broader conversation that might be applicable elsewhere?
Well, I think you see good practice in different areas around the world. You know, I would certainly say the Nordic countries very early on put in great paid family medical leave policies. And what you see now, 30 years on, is that not only do women take those paid leaves, but men do, and men participate longer with the child caring over time. And that makes an enormous societal difference, not just for women being able to go back to work, but for the care and the well-being of the child. So we see that. We see South Africa trying to put in really good programs around domestic violence. We see it in France. They made sure during COVID-19 that women could go to a pharmacy or even a grocery store to talk about domestic violence and report it in their own community. I see great examples, as I said, in India and Pakistan about using women's collectives, but also digital cash transfer payments to make sure social protection went into the hands of women. Those are all things that help families and help society, because we know when you invest in women, they invest in everybody else. And when you unlock women's potential and you help empower them and you take down these barriers of domestic violence or abuse, you take down the barrier of caregiving, then women can make sure that their families are fed, their children go to school, and that they work and bring in economic means to their family. And women will tell you all over the world, whether you're in India or Bangladesh, or whether you're in Niger, or you're in South Africa, whether you're in the United States, women will tell you that everybody in my family, everybody in my community looks at me differently when I bring income into my household. That is when you start to see real empowerment, because then that money gets funneled back into children's health, into their education, and into the family life. And that benefits not just the family, but the community as a whole and the economy. And so those are all things that we can look at around the world to say, how do we put good programming in with the right data so we know we're making the right investments that will really unlock women's full potential and empower them, and they're going to empower then everybody else and empower our economic recoveries.
I was hoping for another 5 minutes. I'm told to wrap, unfortunately. Let me thank you both. Ms. Melinda French Gates, co-chair of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and Ms. Sima Sami Bahous, the newly announced Executive Director of UN Women, who I'm sure we'll be seeing in the corridors here at UN headquarters in the near future. Thank you so much for your insights and for sharing them with us.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Listening to all of you, it's clear that in order to return to a path of poverty reduction and prosperity, gender equality must be addressed as a matter of urgency. Thank you for your time, and thank you to you as well for those watching online. We are taking a break for lunch now, and we'll return for the second half of programming around 2 p.m. Eastern Time here in New York.